Hello and welcome to episode 11 of In Isolation, UK Climbing's competition climbing chat show. Natalie up in Scotland with the 5 mile radius, really the only one of us still in isolation. But even for those of us who are a little more free and easy as the regulations get relaxed, it's going to be a pretty tough show today for several reasons. We're tackling some very current and quite tricky social issues which affect the whole world right now and the climbing world. And it's also the first show we've done since the death of Luce Douady, the extremely promising French young climber who died at age 16, and she fell on the way down to a crag just north of Grenoble. Youth World Champion, finalist already in a senior competition in Boulder, and on the podium for the European League Championship. So the real deal, an amazing career ahead of her. Clearly a World Cup winner, world champion of the future, but not to be. But Natalie, it was last Sunday it happened, and it was pretty hard to swallow.
Yeah, I just couldn't believe it when I read the news. It's like she's so young, and the circumstances as well. Just really tragic. I didn't know Luce personally, but I remember her from a European Cup in Innsbruck last year, which she won. And even though it was a senior event, but it was mostly juniors, she just blew everyone away. And then in Vale, the World Cup last year, I was warming up and she was right beside me. And I knew who she was from Innsbruck, but she was doing this really energetic floor routine, seemed really focused, really determined, doing all these breathing exercises. And she caught my eye and I thought, oh, it'll be interesting to see what she does today. And then she just blew everyone away again, came 5th in her first ever senior World Cup. Just unbelievable.
This is going to sound bad. I hope people understand what I mean when I say this, but I was surprised how much it upset me because I don't know her. Obviously saw her in Vale, said good luck for the final, interviewed her when she won her Youth World Championship. I know all the climbers. I know in inverted commas all the climbers, but I couldn't claim to know her well by any means. But just something about someone so talented and so clearly about to have an amazing life getting snuffed out at 16 is pretty brutal. I remember when I heard the news, it was hammering with rain here, and pulled on my running kit. And I'm not a runner, so it was particularly unusual, and just kind of went for a run and got back, lungs burning, soaking wet, but you just wanted to sort of feel alive. I suppose I always think when you lose people in the mountains or in accidents like this, I suppose the one good thing that comes out of it, if anything, is that it does make you live a little more fully, and you kind of go for that beer with the friend you haven't seen for a while, and you go for that run you wouldn't have gone for, and kind of jolt you into realizing it's not forever, but it's a pretty slim positive from a pretty bad day.
It's been really nice to read everyone's messages, especially from the young climbers. Like, I know they're having a really hard time anyway during coronavirus, but it's just really sad that they're not able to see each other and grieve and remember Luce at competitions. But it's been nice to see all the tributes and, you know, videos from the IFSC and the FFME. But I think most of all, what speaks volumes is people are remembering her, not just for her climbing, but also for how smiley she was, how friendly she was. She just seemed to be having great fun at the same time as like picking up medals in senior competitions, making finals.
Yeah, pretty tough day all round, but not much to add. Bad news, a bad week in what's been a pretty bad year. But on with the show. We have a very special guest, and as I say, some more serious chat coming up in just a second. So after a bit of a somber start to the episode talking about Luce Douady, we can turn maybe briefly to lighter matters. We might get stuck into some tougher topics later on, but for now, slightly lighter matters. With Tonde Katiyo, professional routesetter. What can we give as your bio?
I think you just did. Professional routesetter. I don't have any other marketable skills, so that's it.
Well, we can hear some kids in the background, so Dad as well.
Dad as well, it's true.
And they may make an appearance later on. But, for now, we got you all to ourselves. How's things in Seattle? It sounds pretty feisty there right now.
It is a lot of things happening. Obviously the COVID crisis was already in full swing, and in recent weeks, the Black Lives Matters movement has kind of exploded over America, and Seattle's been one of the places where it manifested itself, I guess, pretty strongly. So yeah, it's a lot of interesting things happening. I think it's safe to say pretty historic, but also challenging when you are actually like living here. We're talking about violence. We're talking about violence towards Black people. So there's some angst in the process, even though like I certainly am experiencing it something overwhelmingly positive.
You were born in France, am I right? And then, but you grew up in Zimbabwe. How
Correct.
did you discover climbing?
I attended a French school in, oh man.
Don't worry about it.
Keep going.
It's not too bad. Like it's not like,
it's really not.
Okay.
It's fine. Yeah.
It just sounds loud to me.
No, it's fine. There's kids and cats everywhere.
I attended a French school in Zimbabwe, which was a smaller school, and my teacher there was from France and was a climber, and happened to be mentioning it in a conversation, was asking questions and asked if I wanted to try. And I said yes. I think I was 12 or 13, and I haven't looked back since.
And I understand that you started life as a graphic designer.
Yep.
It doesn't seem a logical leap to route setting. How did that come about?
It's not logical. I
both
guess,
creative, I suppose.
Yeah, they are both creative. There's actually a lot of connections. I found a lot of connections between the two. Effectively, how it happened is I chose to not work in climbing when I was like early in my career, specifically because I quickly understood that as soon as you work in climbing, you effectively stop climbing. So I decided that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted climbing to remain something that was a leisure, a sport, a place of like freedom for me. So I trained as a graphic designer because it was something that I was passionate about, and then worked in large agencies in Paris. The internet was booming at the time, so there was plenty of work, and then quickly worked as a freelance. And then almost 10 years, I worked as a freelance in Paris. But I got frustrated with it. It's hard, like just freelance work in general is hard in big cities. And although my work climbing balance was quite good, the level of happiness in my work was pretty low. But all through this time, I was route setting because when I was a student, I started route setting for free climbing. And then it's just something I continued to do because there was opportunity. And then when I stopped, I decided to stop route setting. It was graphic design. Just turned out route setting was the only thing I knew how to do. So when I was tired of waiting tables or working in a bar, I was like, well, hey. So then I just decided to take it more seriously and proactively seek out route setting work. And that's what led me. Fortunately, it was, I think, a good timing because there was demand, and I accidentally had skills in route setting because it really wasn't planned.
Just trying to tie those links together between route setting and design. You talk quite a bit about design thinking, for example, in route setting. Do you feel there's an influence between the two?
Definitely. Design, again, because my only point of reference, because I wanted to progress in route setting, my only point of reference was my most recent professional career, which was also a passion. Like it was kind of a heartbreaking separation with graphic design. I quit mostly because of external factors more than the fact that I was tired of it. I wasn't able to make enough money. It was a lot of work. It was very politically connected and just things I didn't enjoy. So, but I was still passionate about the topic itself. And because there's a creative element and constraints in both, I found it quite easy to find parallels between the two. And graphic design served as a structure for me to sort of organize my thought and my own progression. Like, how do I get better at route setting? I just went to graphic design or other fields to find answers to like how they resolved issues with creativity and constraints. And it moved me forward in route setting. So it worked.
You've talked quite a lot about athletic empathy. What is this and how do you implement it in route setting?
So athletic empathy is a term I coined just to explain, I guess it's something I didn't invent it. Like, I maybe have invented the word, but the process itself is something that good route setters have done instinctively forever. It's just this idea of understanding who you're setting for. And it's a common idea it's borrowed from design thinking, where the first step of designing any object or any process, you start by asking, who are you setting for? Who are you working for? Who's your audience? And what are they able to absorb and understand? And then you take that very strongly into account with the idea that you're trying to connect them with. Because if you don't, you could miss the point. So classic examples is like telling a story to a young child, an adult, or an expert in the field. How you're going to talk to them and how you're going to connect with them is going to be extremely different. And I think that's the step that's been lacking in route setting a lot, is just that understanding. And mostly because I was teaching route setting a lot and I had to explain this idea. Whereas before, it kind of just spontaneously communicated itself between when you worked with the good route setter. It's like, oh, that's how you do it. But it wasn't necessarily, you weren't necessarily able to explain it. How do I do this? Why am I changing this or making this tweak? And so I gave it a name, athletic empathy.
Two things. Firstly, I can't believe you invented a phrase. That's awesome. But secondly, I wanted to ask you about route setting. I know you've worked with a lot and who's really into the intricacies of movement. Jackie Godoff, one of my favorite people in the climbing world. What was it like working with him?
It was fantastic. Jackie was the most supportive and encouraging. He's maybe the single person who gave me the faith to become a route setter, because I was coming out of a career of being a graphic designer. And it was like, route setting was a hobby. I did not take it seriously. And he gave me a few opportunities, setting like training camps or comps for the French national team. And he was very supportive of the fact that my ideas were a little bit different. Like, the way I set boulders was different from what he did. And I was very self-conscious. I was setting with like a legend of mine, this incredible climber. But honestly, he's really humble. He's really good at taking important things not too seriously, which allows to, it gives a lot of freedom. I think one of the strongest ideas he communicated to me is the value of teamwork. Climbing by and large is an individual sport, and I think our mentalities are kind of shaped by the way we approach it. It's at most a team of 2 or 3. Route setting really requires, at least at a large scale, working with the team and interacting. And when there's creative choices in there, when there's discussion and tension, basically we're not very well equipped to navigate that as individualists. It's not a negative thing. It's just, I think route setting is amplified by a team. And for sure, Jackie is one of the persons who opened me up to that. And to this day, he's a friend, still a mentor. Every time I talk with him, I'm just like, oh yeah, that's another thing I didn't think about. So, and I think that's remarkable, to have a career where you continue to still be relevant, late into your 60s, that he's still influencing our sport in so many ways. Yeah, I consider myself very lucky to have had that opportunity. And probably not meeting him, I wouldn't even be here talking with you. I'd still be struggling to figure out how to design cereal packages or something.
Just winding it back a bit further in your life, you competed in competition climbing like many route setters have, and decided, well, maybe it wasn't for you in a competitive kind of way. Same was for me, apart from not being good enough. But what's it like switching to the role of the route setter and operating in a stressful environment, but on a different side of the fence?
So let's not blow things out of proportion. I have competed. I definitely wouldn't consider myself, I never was a serious competitor. I was never in a club, never had a coach. I competed essentially because I was passionate about climbing. And at the time, it's interesting, I felt obliged to compete because I felt like if I was a serious climber, I had to be all in. And so in spite of the fact that it never went well for me, it was like unpleasant experiences. My results were always well below my capacities. And the truth is I failed at competition climbing. I flunked out of it. I was like, oh, I'm giving up, and that's the end of it. And it's not until almost 10 years later when I became a route setter and had opportunities to work with people like Jackie, in particular with his capacities as a coach, and understanding the role of a coach and the responsibilities of a route setter, that things became more apparent. I was like, that's why I couldn't do it. Like, I was not equipped for it. Nobody experienced the right things for me. I was not in the right attitude. I was training the wrong things. So I was setting myself up for it to be a bad situation. So that transition was really interesting. And maybe because it was such a powerful revelation, that's also what has, I guess, captivated me about coaching. I'm associated and have, done a lot of coaching work, but I really don't consider myself a coach. I just feel like the experience I had from being a competitor and then understanding my, I guess, transition to route setting, and then the opportunities I've had to work with so many very competent coaches and route setters have given me insight that when I see people climb, I can't help but know why there's a problem. So I'm not a professional coach by any means. I don't have any formal training in it, but by virtue of the experience that I've had, both personally and professionally, I think I have things to contribute. So as you can see, I have a little bit of trouble owning it, but I know the information is there, and I try and share it with as many people as I can.
I think for me and my route setting, kind of chiming into the athletic empathy side of things as well. If you've done a few events, even if you were terrible, it still gives you a little bit of an idea of what it's like to be a competitor on somebody else's boulders and how that makes you feel, and how that can feed into your own route setting work, and how people are going to experience certain boulders or certain themes. And for me personally, it was important to actually go there no matter how badly you did.
Definitely. I think you nailed it. Maybe the key idea, and I think one that's not talked about enough, is this idea of feeling, the idea of the emotions that are in play. And the reality is, for so many athletes, it's not about technical ability or strength, or we know it's off the charts. There's so much evidence that people are far and beyond stronger than they need to be, and yet they don't perform for whatever reason, or they get outclimbed by somebody else. And the linchpin is managing the emotions that are at play. When you know you can win, can you still win? Just the experience of the emotion of knowing that you can win, or when we know we can send a route. We've all had that experience where we're falling on the last move, or we're so close, and yet it still takes 10 more tries to do. It's not about strength. So this idea, we talk about it vaguely, it's in your head, or it's a really powerful engine for both my work as coach and a route setter.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Have you got any climbers that you're really proud of, that you think you've really brought the best out of? Because just link it back to what I was watching recently, The Last Dance on Netflix. Currently watching it for the second time. And I don't care what you think. I just think it's amazing.
No judgment.
I'm not
I'm a geek. But yeah, the coach, Phil Jackson of the Bulls in the 90s, it seems like he got that amazingly well. Dennis Rodman in the middle of the playoffs needed to go to Las Vegas and blow off steam for 5 days, and he did it pretty effectively. And Michael Jordan needed to be challenged, and Scottie Pippen needed to feel important. And he really kind of managed a group of essentially misfits. Have you got some climbers that you really feel that you've brought on? Ideally, ones that we can keep an eye out for.
Again, not being a proper coach, I have trouble. I work with a few people, but it's very punctual, and I definitely don't think I've worked with anybody long enough or with enough to claim any influence on their climbing. By and large, like, they're remarkable athletes, but they have done the lion's share of the work, and I really can't claim any credit for anyone. I can claim a lot more credit for making strong climbers fall off climbing walls. I've got a long list of names on that one.
Of all the IFSC events that you've set at, are there any that were particularly memorable for you in terms of setting, like specific moments or problems that you're especially proud of?
I mean, the last one I set was Paris 2016 World Championships. I don't think anybody involved with that event can really forget it. It was a pretty remarkable event. Just being there, I think even spectators, like, the show was pretty incredible. To be honest, it's also probably hands down one of the most grueling events I've ever worked for. Really, really hard conditions to work in. 2 walls. We had to work on a schedule. We had to work between, 4-hour breaks because they were changing the lights, and we just had to sit there and wait. And setting semifinals while qualifiers are running in tiny spaces behind curtains. Really hard conditions, and a true testament to the leadership and the skill of the people who were leading the setting teams. The lead was absolutely amazing. So that one was it stood out. I think what's particularly powerful about events in general is, like, their moments. Concerts will do that. And I'm really attached these days to this idea of moments of climbing. Just like it's a chemical balance that is, like, part questions or ideas introduced by the route setters, the climbers' energy or willingness to connect or ability to connect with the climbing, and then it gets amplified or exploded by the energy of the audience. And those things don't always come together. Like, sometimes the route setters ask the wrong questions. Sometimes you ask the right questions, but the climbers don't have the energy, maybe depending on where in the season it is, and then sometimes the audience is just not into it. Like, it happens, musicians will tell you it happens at shows. So every comp has its moment. But yeah, so many good memories, and so many friends, so many people that I've met, some of whom are on this call.
Just wanted to go back to that Paris 2016 competition a little bit, and Jamie Cassidy, who we had on earlier on in the series, has talked to me personally, kind of pub chat quite a lot about that competition and how horrendous it was, the working environment. And it really cemented this idea for me that there's lots of good route setters out there, but the best route setters are the ones who can perform and set amazing boulders in the worst possible conditions. And if you can set really good boulders in conditions that are so far from what you would want to set an amazing boulder, then that makes you a good route setter in that environment. And that really stuck with me, and something for guys at home. It doesn't matter how good you are, if you can't operate and set your boulders outside of your own home gym when it's dark and you're trying to route set with a head torch, and there's like the sound system, the light system all being tested at 3 a.m, that's when you become a good route setter.
Yeah. And I think that's also the definition of creativity, which gets misconstrued with aestheticism. being creative is making something good with what you have, with what's available, and in spite of constraints. It's a pretty powerful idea in design, even to the point where the more constraints you have, the more creative you have to be. And I think in route setting in particular, it's very useful, very powerful.
Yeah, +1 on Paris, by the way. That's the biggest feeling competition I've been to at the IFSC.
Yeah.
Even the takedown was hard. You know, Justin Bieber played in the arena the night after the lead final.
Yeah.
And I was even more glad to be leaving, to be honest, after knowing he was coming up. But we've talked a little bit about setting, but what do you make of the direction that setting, particularly IFSC setting at the sharp end of the spear, what do you make of the direction that's taking right now?
There's good and bad. Unfortunately, my sentiment is that over the past few years, the bad is slowly starting to outweigh the good. It's hard to talk about because there's a lot of friends, a lot of people who I value who are involved in this. But at the same time, I think it's important in order to move forwards to, state things. I'm challenged by some of the politics around route setting in general. I think there's a little lack of transparency about how things work and why things work the way they do, and maybe a little bit of conflict between responsibility and convenience. So it's challenging because at the same time, so some ideas that can seem, I'm just an external person. I have stake in the game because I would want to be or desire to be a setter in the IFSC if I were able. So I just want to clarify my position. Like, I'm speaking my opinion, sharing to move things forward, but I have to give disclaimers. While I am expressing some criticism, I also understand it's not a cut and dry, easy thing to solve. Who gets to set for IFSC competitions? I'm challenged by the politics of how that works and the opportunities that are available. I'm challenged by the fact that it's the same people who've been doing it for a long time, in spite of the fact that I support that idea because they're also the people who know how to make a competition work. So it has to be I think the gap for me is education. There's no strong means of communication of the high-end route setting ideas between the people who are currently doing it and the people who should be doing it, but I think are not yet ready to. And the trick now is they also don't have the opportunity to set in competitions. So that's for the politics of it. Politics around the holds as well. Which holds get to be in and which ones get to be out. All the good ones are in, all the steps in that direction are positive. The problem is, by virtue of the economics, it gives advantages to certain countries over others. That's the part I have issue with. And it's kind of reinforcing a model where the advantage is always for the same teams or the same countries or the same people. So I feel like it would be nice to see more opportunities created so that the World Cup included more of the world and the World Championships as well. So I know work is being done to that end. I would like to see more of it. And especially in the current context of what is happening in the United States, and by and large, it's affecting the rest of the world. I think there's a reflection in those ideas. And I'd like to say I'm attached to a sport proudly that I love and I'm passionate about and has given a lot to me, and that it's going to continue going in a way that I can be proud of and that is contributing to the solutions more than the problems. So yeah, I don't have all the information. I'm on the outside. I only have my experience. All in all, almost, I think, 10 IFSC competitions. plus a lot of setting in like other countries. I think I've set nationals in 15 countries in the world. So I consider that I have a certain perspective. It's not the only perspective, and I do feel that there's some work to be done there.
Just playing into that a little bit before, you've quoted before, a good route setter, like a good climber, is genderless. There's a lot of chat amongst many people about getting more women into route setting, rightly, especially at a World Cup level. How do you feel? Can you just explain how you feel on that topic, and this idea of going back to athletic empathy as well, and how maybe women setting women's boulders or vice versa may be a good or a bad thing?
So my comment on good route setters being genderless speaks to the fact that, I mean, I am absolutely in support of there being more women in route setting. Effectively, I think diversity is the key to moving forward. The more, like, it's almost the fundamental idea to training. If you want to be a better climber, do many different things. Like, you've got to be a complete climber. You have to know how to crimp, how to, do longer boulders, all the things have to be, that's the person who wins, the person who's got the widest range of skills. So this idea of diversity is a very strong one. And for sure, having a team with very diverse people is the best way forward. Diversity means if all the setters are men, that's not diverse. If all the setters are white, that's not diverse. If all the setters are strong, that's also not diverse. So all these ideas have to be balanced and played in together. The problem is we're in a state where we're completely out of balance. We want to get in balance. And so there's a process in between that has to happen where we artificially have to inject new people in. And this is true in two counts, like in sporting life, but also as a Black person. If I've been discriminated against, and we need to move to a world where there's no discrimination, I have to be given opportunities that I wouldn't have gotten before. Very awkward, very strange. So that hopefully it's just a transition period to get to a place where we don't have to talk about it anymore, because there are there's many people with the skill set, and it's just about choosing them in a way that creates balance. Impossible today. For me, the answer to that is equal opportunity and education. The problem with route setting right now is, in spite of how instrumental it is to both competition and a whole industry that's worth millions, there are exactly 0 route setting schools. There's 0 places to learn this trade properly, in spite of the recognition that it's a difficult job, it's very technical, it requires physical skills, mental skills, and you can't learn it. You just kind of have to like schmooze and connect and hope you're in the right place. And I was lucky to live in France. Honestly, if I didn't live in France and happened to live in Paris and happened to know somebody who happened to, how I met Jackie was he was my instructor at my national route setting course. That was the connection. If I happened to live in Zimbabwe and I had the same aspirations, well, good luck. I would never have had those opportunities. So, and even today, in the age where you can travel, people are willing to fly to places to learn a skill. Where do you go? If you're 20-something, passionate about it, and you want to, and the IFSC, questions get this question all the time. How do I become an IFSC route setter? There is no answer. You can't, basically, is the proper one. And if you do, it's because you were just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. So I feel like that's unfortunate. Coming back to the question of gender diversity, I am absolutely in support of there being more women. But for me, the idea is not as simple as women should be setting for women boulders. I think maybe on the contrary. In my experience here at the Bouldering Projects, some of the most interesting, extremely hard boulders are set by people who were women and didn't climb the level, but were very good route setters, had a process, worked with a team, and the output were incredible boulders. And I think that's where the education and teamwork are values that need to be built up and supported in the profession.
I think that's a really interesting point you make, because I think some of the best finals we've seen have been set by head setters who maybe aren't great climbers. And I always watch it. I mean, obviously they're good climbers, but they're not strong enough to do the boulders in the way that some other head setters could. And I always watch it and I think, how have you done that?
Yeah,
you can't climb these boulders, but you've got it spot on. Well,
our job as route setters is not to climb boulders. It's to understand what people are able to do. And it's also an idea, again, because of education. I think it's an idea that's too prevalent. You have to climb the level. We can't have girls because they're not strong enough to, and it's not true. It's never about climbing. It never has been. And I'm living proof to that, because I can tell you I'm not a World Cup climber, never have been. And yet I've had a relatively successful career on the international circuit. And I think it's important to own that idea, to say, okay, well, yes, it is important on the team to have people who are able to climb the level. Of course, that's undeniable. But if we have the skills to communicate and to work as a team in an organized way, and we can communicate ideas and get them on the wall and make things happen, it's much more powerful. It's difficult, but I think that's the way forward. It's way more interesting too. It's if route setting wasn't presented that way, I would have already quit a long time ago. Like, if there wasn't the opportunity to interact with other people and learn and grow, and that's another Jackie lesson.
I think I really agree with this way of thinking, and it dispels the reason that kind of I wanted to ask that question. It dispels this myth that you need certain genders to set for that gender, and just the way that people can operate as a team is just so important, and very well put across there for everybody. I think there'll be a lot of people listening who will kind of really appreciate taking the time to explain that properly.
Yeah, and again, bringing this subject up in that way, we need more female route setters. It's a little naive, honestly. It's just like not owning the fact that, well, we're not doing anything to make it easier for girls to be route setters. That's the truth of the matter. Ask most women who've tried to get into route setting or managed, and they struggle twice as much as everybody else. And it involves, again, who you know, what opportunity, and it's unfair, honestly. And it has to be said, because that is the problem. That is the issue we need to deal with. It's not that difficult to solve. We just have to want to. But it's very fixable, and it would be good for us, because a lot of the best route setters I know, I'm happy to say, one of the best route setters I know, I met as a teenager because I did a lot of training camps in Japan. I met her when she was maybe 13 or 14, and I'm extremely happy to say that she is currently becoming one of the IFSC route setters. Her name is Tsukasa Mizugachi, and she stood out to me as a remarkable climber when I met her the first time. And then when I had opportunity to set with her, I've had her as a guest setter come to my gym before. And she is one of the best route setters I know, period. One of the people who I've worked with or climbed with and has blown my mind. I'm like, how does she do? I would never have thought of doing that. That is extremely cool. And it's almost embarrassing to have to say that. Like, I have to say, no, it's not because she's a woman, and it shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't have to specify. But the reality is we do. And that's what we need to work on. That's how we can contribute to the world being a little bit better.
So continuing with the theme of diversity and all the discussions just now about racial inequality, racial injustice, you've been sharing your own perspectives on social media. You posted your own experiences of both the discrimination that you faced and also the privileges that you've had. I think you said your life is both black and white, just like your racial heritage. Can you explain how being mixed race has kind of shaped your life? I know it's a big, broad brush question, but how has it shaped your life, both positively and negatively?
There's something about the absurdity of being judged for skin color, that if you live under the idea that if you live too literally under the reality that it's a fact of life, which it is, you can't live, basically. You know that every time you're basically interacting with the world, you're considered a sub-person, or so it's difficult. I mean, if you did that, you would basically never be happy. It would be impossible to be happy, because you're like, well, I'm never going to be treated fairly. I'm never going to be, and I can't say that is my life experience. I have been happy. I've had lots of, positive interactions. And I think for me, and I think the point of my post was to explain that although it's boiling down in appearance on the surface to a black and white question, the reality is, the whole point is, it's much more complex than that. It's not about our skin color. It's about how we behave to each other. Because literally in the physical, biological world, the fact that our skin colors are different is meaningless. But it's how we behave because of this label that's absurd. And that applies to, bias on gender, on people's sexual identity, all of the things that, and so the problem again is human beings, how we are kind to each other, how we interact with each other, how it's played into my life. I always see it as a richness. Like, I've had the privilege of speaking two languages, of having two perspectives, of a common thing for me. I quite like words and reading, and I'll borrow an idea or an expression from one language and explain it to people who don't speak it in the other, because it's an image, like bats in your belfry. If you explain that in another language, they're like, what? You got, it's silly. But that's the value of culture. That's the value of, I grew up in Africa. A lot of people in the Western Hemisphere have not. And that sort of defines who I am. And growing up in Africa, for example, has given me a perspective on consumerism. I have on waste. That's just different, because when you have experienced firsthand, we had, what's an example? We had water shortages when we lived in Harare. The water would be cut. You open the tap and there's no water. That's a basic human need. And then when when you grow up as a child experiencing that and storing water in tubs and, having to be careful and washing yourself in the same bath that your sister did or whatever, when you see people spraying down their SUV with, 200 gallons of water just because, you can't help but experience something. So it's a gift and a curse. I was graced by an opportunity to learn how to be frugal with water. It hurts me, and I don't know, it's hard to extricate the two things. So I think that it's just a small example, but imagine all my life experiences, or anybody's life experiences, are built that way. I choose to see it as a richness. It's, and I also know and understand that at the same time, the situations in which it's just dangerous for me, whether I like it or not, whether I have anything to do with it. And as I noted in one of my posts, I choose to live in America, a Black man. I choose to live in America, which can seem like a strange choice, but I own it.
Yeah, I don't remember who the quote came from. I don't remember it word for word, but there's a quote that basically says, travel is anathema to hatred and bigotry. And I suppose everyone on this call, we're all quite lucky. You probably more than any of us. We've traveled around and had different experiences, and been in countries where we look like everyone else, and in countries where we don't look like everyone else.
Yeah.
How do you feel your skin color as you travel? Are you more aware of it in some places than others? I mean, you might say you're more aware of it in America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yes, I am.
But what's your experience as you move around the world?
I guess, if anything, it's helped me manage it better, because at the same time, America is one of the places where I felt maybe some of the most hostility for my skin color. At the same time, it's also one of the places where I felt the most solidarity because of my skin color. This is a trade secret Black people know in America. You pass somebody in the street and they're Black, there's always like a nod, an acknowledgement. How you doing? And it comes from the fact that it's just basically a way of saying like, I know what it feels like. I understand what you're experiencing. And it's just a nod in that one little tiny, and that's honestly in my life has been like one of the most powerful things, like being in the United States and just being anywhere, absolutely anywhere, like going through an airport security in some random airport in Texas and just looking up and the security guard will just give me a nod. It's like completely, and I know exactly what that means. So yeah, there's, being in Asia, it's completely transparent. I basically, or it's like a positive difference. People are like amazed or surprised or, so, I think the value in travel, the richness that I've, again, a privilege that I've had is to experience all of these things allows me to understand myself better and navigate it, have more understanding and more compassion and more patience and more, but maybe also because I was fortunate enough to have an education that allows me to take those ideas, because that is foundation. I've read a few things. I've been explained. My family has always been very supportive and understanding. So yeah, it's kind of a smorgasbord of an answer, but that's what it is.
Did you feel that there was a difference moving from France to the US? Was there anything tangible? And do you feel like the Trump administration is making things? It's hard to explain, but it seems so bad, and it's kind of. Is it making things worse?
Absolutely. Of course, it's making things worse. It's also making things better because the provocation and the level of absurdity to which he pushes his extremism triggers even people who voted for him are now like, what? You're doing what? Because it's so selfish and unconcerned and damaging. And so just this idea that things have to get worse before they get better. Between France and the US, is it worse? What can I say? There's different flavors of racism. No, it's not better. It's if you want to hone in on certain specific aspects, some will be better and it's explainable. But I've experienced racism in many countries because I've experienced it in Zimbabwe, which is an African country. I've experienced it in France. I've experienced it in England. I've experienced it in the US. So it's always the same thing. Well, as an opportunity to do what I said earlier, there's a saying in French where it might have been like a protest slogan. Un raciste, c'est quelqu'un qui se trompe de colère. A racist is somebody who's got the incorrect anger, and it's a play on words because it's one letter difference between the word color and anger. So it's just a tiny little shift. And I think that's what it's about. Racism is ultimately not about skin color. It's about what is represented by people who have a color of skin color that's different. Immigration being a screaming example. All the countries in which immigration is an issue, it boils down to, well, you're from another country, you're stealing my job, da-da-da. It's because of your skin color. It's like the simplest denominator.
I don't claim to be an expert. I've never lived in America, but I think it's probably the most interesting place I've ever been in some ways. and I studied it a little bit at university, but as I say, I've never lived there. But what is your take on the culture in America right now in terms of racism? Because my optimistic view is that Trump is the death throes of a group of people that aren't going to matter soon. That's when I'm being positive about the world. I just think it's their last shout, and they are going to be irrelevant in number and volume. Is that the case?
Nope, I don't think so. I think it's...
Is it the silent majority, as Ray would say? Or, I mean, it's just hard to believe that Trump speaks for more than a very small number of people.
It is hard to believe. But I think that's the problem, because he got elected basically because of that disbelief. A lot of people didn't vote because they were like, never, that's never going to happen. And that was the problem, is the understanding of the responsibility of what it means to go and vote and to care and to believe in, you know. So I think I'm a very firm proponent of this idea that we simplify things way too much. I think one idea living here, one idea that really helps me understand the United States better is the United States is 360 million people in a single country. Like, it's compared to like the whole continent of Europe. And so the way when I live in Europe, or I live in France, where it's, I don't know, it's like 80, I can't remember what the last census is, but maybe between 60 and 70 million people, it's absolutely not the same thing. And then the territory is much smaller. So managing things and the distance between things is so it's just a much larger group of people. The contrasts and the differences are so huge between each. It's almost as if certain states could be completely different countries. And that's truly the case, you know. There are, and so governing 360 million people over such a large surface, I think in and of itself helps to explain the challenge of the problem. Like agreeing, like coming to consensus about who should run things or how should we run things is already hard with 10 people, but with 360 million. So that's an idea that's kind of living here, I've gotten a sense of, and that it doesn't excuse things. Like, it's still government and there's still systems in place that should provide some democracy, I guess. But I agree with you, though. It is one of the most interesting places I've lived in. And the natural tendency to want to caricature Americans as, you know, all fat, hamburger eating, you know, and it's very black and white between this racial thing. It's not. It's good to remember that there's a lot of good people here. There's a lot of remarkable, talented people doing very powerful things at the scale of the world. And, you know, the power and the impact of American culture by and large on the whole world for the past, I don't know, 300 years is can't be denied. So you can't, again, you can't throw out one without the other. You can't point at one and say, oh, bad, 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 and then go watch Hollywood movies that are remarkable, listen to all this music, and it's all smashed together. So we have to look closer at things. It's harder and more uncomfortable to understand. And I think maybe discomfort is the trending hashtag of the year. And the capacity more people have to manage discomfort, maybe the better off we'll be.
I could just say for the record, I love America.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite places in the world, and I'm not getting down on it if anyone's watching this. It's my favorite place to go on holiday. So I'm not getting down on it. It's just, it's really interesting to get your perspective.
Thinking about these issues in a climbing context, people say, oh, the climbing community is really inclusive and social and welcoming and friendly. But is it actually useful, do you think, to talk about a climbing community as such, because it's not as though we're totally divorced from the rest of society. What have your experiences been of people in climbing and how it relates to the rest of the world?
I mean, by and large, I feel like climbing is one of the greatest gifts for me. When I teach route setting courses, for instance, I remind route setters that climbing changed my life, like literally. It changed my career, it changed who I am, it changed the places I traveled to, and helped me discover and learn what the world was. I traveled to, an example I often give is Red River Gorge, Kentucky, one of the, great world climbing areas. It was a long time ago, but traveling to Kentucky as a Black person, young, I was in my early 20s maybe, or early 20s, listening to rap music and oh yeah, America's cool, Black music, this is my culture. I went there and I saw poor white people, and I experienced their lives and saw their perspective, effectively people who are Trump electors, and interacting, seeing the people, seeing the conditions they live in, you understand a lot better what's happening in the world because you've seen it firsthand and it's not just this glossy surface. So the value of climbing for me is really high. And my involvement in route setting and my involvement in education and coaching are driven by that idea. If I set a really good boulder that blows the kid of an 8-year-old and they get hooked on climbing, and it's in some city somewhere and anywhere, and it creates this gateway for them to go and discover the world and travel and have, these people who they can sleep on their floor or get a ride from, or all the stories that we all share as climbers. That's a super great thing. At the same time, yes, there is something very climbing community seems to be somewhat in denial that we are actually connected to this bigger society and all the problems that are in it, and we're not in a bubble, So although I've never had overt racial incidents in climbing, I know it's there. I know because it's connected to the world. It can't be removed. And I also know the biggest problem I have is the fact that climbers maybe try to ignore the rest of the world. We love this little bubble of safety, of comfort, of familiarity, and we try and sort of barricade ourselves in it. And I think that's somewhat unhealthy, and for me, counterproductive to the whole point of being a climber. The point is to be more open and to travel and to exchange. And when things get uncomfortable, we try again, another attempt, another try, change beta, do something. So let's call it maturity. We lack a little bit of maturity. We're still a young sport for lots of reasons. We've grown up really fast. And I think the issues we have with route setting that I mentioned earlier also connected to just a bit of grounding and a bit of, but it doesn't, acknowledging it doesn't exempt us from doing the work that's required to be more open, to be more exclusive. By and large, it is an expensive sport, leisure for white people. By and large, it's not very accessible. And I mean, it's kind of tragic, but I looked at the athlete selection for a famous brand I'd rather not name. I don't want to create any issues. Just all the athletes, absolutely every single one was Caucasian. Every single one. And they cover multiple sports and disciplines that are close to alpine skiing. It's just this, it's not diversity. And yet these are the ideas that we claim. Oh, we're so diverse, we're so this. So it's a little disingenuous. We're a teenager where we think we're cool, but maybe not so much. And there's no parent there to so it would be nice if we are able to, take that upon ourselves and grow into it. Hopefully, I have hope.
Do you think your concept of athletic empathy, like that could be useful for making the climbing community a bit less insecure, like thinking from different perspectives and putting yourself in other people's shoes and thinking about how they see things? Is that something you've kind of considered?
I'm not that ambitious. I think for me, the bigger idea is education, because that's what athletic empathy is an element of. It's just an idea. It happens to be an idea that I'm interested in and that I'm teaching and sort of promoting. It's that process that's interesting. I think I always tell people when I teach route setting, this is just my version of it. This is my perspectives. It's not the right way or the only way, or, it's one way. Take what pieces feel useful to you and make your own way. That's another idea I'd like to dispel a little bit, is this idea that there's a right climbing. It comes out, for example, when athletes ask route setters, did I do it the right way? Did you get to the top? Like, what game are we playing here? It's not a test to fit into this one little, it comes out when route setters ask, how do I force a move? Since when do you force a move? Like, when we're trying to get to the top of a rock, we find the best way that suits us. And if you're tall, you're going to do it one way, short. And that we're squashing it down into this small little box where there's the right way, the correct way. And, oh, this is not climbing. Route setters get that a lot. Oh, it's parkour style. It's not climbing. Why? Why are we so afraid that things are going to be so different? Or when, crack climbing and miring it, and that's the iconic thing, it's got so much conversation. It's literally one of the most popular moves in climbing. Like even today, you could say it's an old style, it's traditional, but literally the Dawn Wall, the mega proj, the most modern climbing route, is like 2/3 of it is all crack climbing. There's one boulder in one boulder competition, and everyone's like, oh my God, this is mind blowing. It's like, literally, what sport are we doing? And in a way, it's like, do we know our history? Do we know how all of these things are connected? And my answer is like, clearly we don't. If we're asking or reacting that way, how can people be shocked? And was I surprised that all these Japanese kids couldn't do it? No. Is there something that makes Adam Ondra remarkable in climbing? Yes. And it's not because he climbs the hardest routes in the world. It's because he's able to do so many different things. That's what's incredible about him. So I think this for me is the maturity conversation, is we just need to grow up a little bit. It's not so difficult to understand. It's a little uncomfortable. It means some concessions and some constraints. It's like being an adult. Pay your taxes.
Oh, what a great answer. I almost want to leave it there, but we've got a few more questions. It just seems such a shame not to sign off there.
Shuffle them around.
Yeah, exactly. We'll put that at the end. But just going back to the participation and diversity, we've got the same thing in Europe, particularly the UK. The BMC survey shows participation numbers amongst minorities, people of colour, is horrific, less than 1%, I believe. Do you have any idea why that might be?
Again, like what society do we live in? It's the answer to the question. It's nothing to do with climbing. It's climbing. The same people who are evolving in climbing evolve in the society that's in the British society. What issues do you have in British society? Is race and immigration a problem? It's again, that connection is so it's pretty simple. There's socioeconomic factors, there's political factors, and you can't be a person in 2020 and think that things have no political weight. Even buying from this brand or that brand is a political statement. We don't like that idea. It's uncomfortable. I wish it wasn't so. I don't want to feel bad about, buying something that is a little bit cheaper because it's made in China, but we're all doing it. Like all of our headphones, all of our phones, we have the luxury of all of these things because we're willing to say, okay, I'm okay with this. That's what it means. We don't. And I think in the answer to your climbing question, the diversity question is similar, is what are we not facing? And again, if we wanted to change, if we actually wanted to change, there are steps to be taken, which will be uncomfortable. Creating programs for youth from tough neighborhoods to come into the gyms. How is that going to play out with our usual members who are used to this comfort and the environment that they've been expected, and that they paid for, and what is the interaction going to be like, and can we get it to a level where everybody opens up and it serves as a. Wouldn't it be great if climbing was a vehicle of social ascension, where gave inner city kids the opportunity, if only to discover the outdoors, if only that would be amazing, because we know contact with nature makes everybody just like happier. We all know that because we're climbers. It's like you go out and you actually get no climbing done, and you just belayed your friends because you had a hangover from the day before and you had a really good day. And why? Because you don't have money and you're already having a terrible week because you would stop twice by the police, and you'd like to enjoy that, but it's not accessible. There's no in-way for that. And if the in-way was like, well, there's a climbing gym in my city neighborhood and they're taking a trip on Sunday and they're taking the minivan out, and it's as simple as that. But that little sentence I just described is a lot of money, a lot of willingness, volunteering, and that's on all of us. Like everybody's got to pitch in.
Being influential like you are in the climbing industry and having a voice, and us being here talking about this with all of your coaching work and your teachings within Routesetting, do you see yourself as a role model for more Black and people of color climbers to get into this sport?
That's a weird one for me. I've gotten this question before in lots of different ways. Why am I not more of an activist? Because I'm such an exception. It's a good question, especially because I have a lot of grounds to be. My father was a freedom fighter, basically. He was a political refugee. He fought for his country, not in physical war, but in writing, in activism. So I have all the seeds to take on the fight. And at the same time, I dream of a world where it's not necessary, where I don't have to act differently or say, I don't have to do the thing. As you said, I have some, recognition. I'm relatively, and I have to do that. And then on top of it, say, hey, everybody, I'm an influential guy and I'm Black. I should be, am I not a role model because I'm doing it? People who are the same color can recognize themselves in me. So I don't know. I hope it's enough. It's my way of doing it. It feels the most natural. I salute and thank all the people who are more militant. If I did it that way, it wouldn't feel right. So I try and speak out. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so. I teach. I feel like that's really important and foundational. And I try and make sure, I am careful about what I say to make sure that it carries the weight of me understanding who I am and what I do. But I also don't try and, it would not feel right to me to do it a different way. So I hope it's enough. I hope it's right. And if it isn't, I hope I'll figure it out and figure out how to do it better. But I'm a reluctant person of influence. I understand the necessity for the fame. I don't really enjoy it.
In a similar vein to that, is there a risk that climbers like the Mawin brothers, they've qualified for Tokyo, is there a risk that people see them as maybe tokens or as tokenization? So they dismiss issues of racism in climbing. They think, a Black person's doing well or has made it. That means there isn't a problem. Is that an issue, do you think?
I mean, we got 2. We're good. No, I mean, I'm in the same case. Is it enough? Well, you're here. Oh, it's not the point. Again, it's not about skin color. It's not about, and like we're wrong on 2 counts. Like, you know, the place of women is very debated in climbing and many sports, unfortunately, as it is in society. And race is the same. So I had a talk with a friend of mine, Io, the other day, and his question was like, well, are we counting? Is there a percentage we have to hit and then we're good? Like, is that how we solve the problem? Again, I feel like it's this teenager stage. It's kind of a simplistic way to put the problem. So I understand it. It means, you know, here's the harder one for me right now. What does that mean about my success? If I made it is it because I'm the token black guy? Did they just let me in because like, oh, okay, we need one? That one is, would I have done better in other circumstances? What does it all mean? I don't know. I don't have the answers to those questions, but I feel like those are more complicated questions and they reveal the difficulty of, the problem. It's not that simple.
I think the same exactly applies to females within routesetting as well. Same argument.
Same. Yeah. It's funny. It's the same problem. It's just applied to different groups. It's more about power and privilege and discomfort and dealing with emotions. Those are relevant to all of those situations. It's not really just about skin color. So putting more people with different skin color in the group doesn't fix the problem, you know, because we know how to do that. We've seen it done before. That's just playing politics. Solving the problem is different. It has to be change, and everybody's scared of change. But I think it'll be positive by and large.
I hope so. We said earlier that travel is anathema to bigotry and hatred, and I think one of the best things anyone can do is talk to someone who has a better understanding of topics than them and articulates them better than they do. And I definitely feel like I've had that experience today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you taking the time and giving such thought-provoking answers. I kind of written off going to sleep tonight because now I'm just going to be staring at the ceiling and that stuff. But that's great. That's what a good conversation is. But I think we should let you go. I'm kind of aware of what time it is. But fantastic, really amazing insight and so well articulated, and just that was amazing. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tonde.
Yeah, I really appreciate you reaching out. Let me know if you need anything else.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tonde.
Take care.